So at the end of phase 2, you arrive at a series of narrative statements that you think are really important from the data. And again, you want to make sure that those narrative statements are clear enough and specific enough that you're really able to understand what you're really seeing in those narrative statements without having to look at the data anymore. And then you move on to phase 3, which is organize and integrate. This by far is the most complicated. It's also the longest phase in the data dialogue process, and it's a lot of times where people really start to struggle. And in phase 3, what you're really trying to do is you break that down into 2 pieces. The first piece is examining causal theories and trying to discover why a particular narrative statement is occurring, or why we have an achievement gap, or why we have a low level of proficiency. And then the next part of that phase is you really want to start to think about action steps that you can take to remedy the situation. In phase 3, trying to establish causal theories is very often the most difficult step. And one of the reasons for that is because here we bring those assumptions that we've surfaced in phase 1, they tend to come back in phase 3. And we see a lot of statements and conversations made about what students bring to the table, for example, or particular issues around scheduling or whatever issue du jour happens to be in the particular school or district. So it's sometimes very, very difficult to get people to look objectively at all 6 of the potential causal theories and how any one of those 6 or a combination of those 6 might really have something to play in terms of why you see the narrative statements that you see. As an example, if you go back to the writing example that I've talked about previously, we identified a major achievement gap between boys and girls in this particular district. And we wanted to look at curriculum, for example, which is one of the causal theories. And so if we were going to blame the curriculum, then the hypothesis was that many of the writing prompts that were included in their curriculum were in fact girl specific. That's a great statement, that's a great potential cause, but we can't just accept that at face value. And so one of the ways of confirming that, of course, was to collect all of those writing prompts that were used in the K-3 writing program, to look at them to see if in fact they were more girl specific, girl centric as opposed to boys specific. And then we could bring that data back to talk about curriculum. One of the other areas that they identified was not a lot of time spent in some of the early grades on writing. Well, again, that's a statement that which may or may not be true. So we had to collect schedules and we had to collect lesson plans from teachers to confirm how much time is actually being dedicated to writing. Before you start to solve that problem, again, you want to make sure that timepiece that they identified was in fact accurate. So in phase 3, people's beliefs and assumptions resurface. And you have to be, as a facilitator, you have to be really, really skilled at knowing and being able to see when those beliefs are popping back up again and what you can do to combat their arrival. So very often I would say things like, if this is a particular issue that you think is a particular cause, then we need to look at it objectively, and we need to look at some data that we could use that would confirm that particular cause. This is how we make sure that we don't simply add a series of initiatives onto teachers' already full plates. We don't ask them to solve a problem that really doesn't exist. And so when potential beliefs spring back up into the surface, we want to make sure that we objectively look at them and can confirm them with some objective data before we ask teachers to do yet another thing. And that really helps, that whole rationalization really helps keep beliefs and philosophies tempered and keeping the conversation focused more objectively on the data that is presented. So at the conclusion of phase 3, we would have identified very specific causal theories for why the narrative statements that were discovered in phase 2, why they exist. We would have established a specific plan for how we would confirm that link between that potential causal theory and the narrative statement that was identified. And once those causes were confirmed, the final piece and the most interesting for classroom teachers is to think about what we can do to fix it. And so you really want to wrap up a data dialogue from beginning to end with very specific action steps that can be used to start to solve the problems that were identified throughout the whole data dialogue process. And then, of course, you want to plan for progress monitoring and for ongoing discussions and looking at the data to see if we're making any progress. And ultimately, what we hope to see is that these big ideas, these narrative statements, and their causes that are confirmed, and then specific action steps, we want to see those action steps show up in the transformation plan or turnaround plan, and certainly in the school improvement plans and district improvement plans of our schools that are engaging in this type of work.